Hi, this is Len Furman, the sports time traveler, and I'm very excited to be continuing my coverage of the 1963 football season exactly 60 years ago. Today's episode is titled This Week in Football, November 9-10, 1963. Jim Brown, Roger Staubach, Y.A. Tittle, number one Texas, the Bears, the Chargers, and more. We start with an introduction from the sports time traveler. The Sports Time Traveler is still 1 week behind in covering the 1963 football season. The games are getting more important and more interesting as we get into mid November. I traveled back in time this week virtually to cover the games of Saturday, November 9th and Sunday, November 10th. The bylines for all the short stories in this article are dated November 12th, 1963, because that is the day I finished reading the newspaper archives before my return trip to 2023. We start with a short article titled The Championship of Maryland, Annapolis, November 12th, 1963. On Saturday in Annapolis, a sellout crowd of 30,035 fans packed Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium for the unofficial college football championship of Maryland. Number 4 Navy played host to Maryland, and although Maryland came into the game at just 2-5, the Terrapins were coming off a near upset of Penn State, one of the top 25 teams in the nation based on AP voting. But any hopes of a Terrapin upset on Saturday were quickly squelched by Navy's sensational quarterback, Roger the Dodger Staubach. In a little more than one half, Staubach ran for 2 touchdowns and passed for 2 more, and Navy led 35-0 just 6 minutes into the third quarter. Staubach went to the bench, and the second and third string players finished out the 42-7 win. Staubach only completed 7 of 12 passes for 104 yards and rushed for 20 yards, but his impact on the game was unquestionable. NFL veteran Gino Marchetti of the Baltimore Colts, a starter on the Colts defensive line, was at the game to scout Staubach for Baltimore. He told Ed Schoenfeld of the Tribune Publishing Company, "This is the finest quarterback I've seen play college football in 12 years." Tom Nugent, Maryland head coach, had this to say about Staubach in an interview with Alan Goldstein of the Baltimore Sun. "He's a real leader. We predicted most of the things he did. I guess everybody does, but we couldn't stop him. Staubach truly is the greatest quarterback of them all, the finest I've seen anywhere." The next article is titled The Championship of Texas, Austin, Texas, November 12th, 1963. 6-0 Baylor visited 7-0 number 1 ranked Texas on Saturday in an effective Texas college football championship. Baylor features the quarterback who has the most yardage in college football, Don Troll. But while Troll completed 19 passes for 204 yards, he also missed on 20 other passes. In addition, Baylor's ground game was non existent. Texas held Baylor to just 6 yards rushing. On offense, Texas quarterback Duke Carlisle moved the ball efficiently as the Longhorns gained 242 yards rushing and 60 yards passing. Yet Baylor's defense limited the Longhorns to just one scoring drive, a third quarter touchdown. Late in the game, with the score still just 7-0 Texas, Don Troll drove Baylor down to the Texas 19-yard line. With 29 seconds to go, Troll threw into the end zone, where he was intercepted by none other than the Longhorns quarterback, Duke Carlisle, who was also playing defensive halfback. Carlisle, who had graced the cover of Sports Illustrated just 3 weeks earlier, was the hero of the game as Texas was victorious 7-0 and maintained their undefeated record. The next article is titled Battle of Brothers, Champaign, Illinois, November 12th, 1963. Last Saturday, number 2, Illinois, hosted Michigan in a family affair. The head coaches of the opposing squads are brothers. Pete Elliott commands the Fighting Illini, while Bump Elliott is the leader of the Wolverines. Michigan entered the game with a disappointing 2-3-1 record, but they had some reason to believe as they were coming off a convincing 27-6 win over a 4-2 Northwestern team that had nearly beaten Illinois earlier in the season. Michigan's confidence was evident in the first half when they ran 28 plays to Illinois' 9 and led 7-0 at halftime. But in the third quarter, Illinois went on a monster 17 play, 92-yard drive for a touchdown and then elected to go for the 2 points. They successfully ran it in to take an 8-7 lead. Late in the fourth quarter, Illinois was still holding on to the 8-7 lead and had the ball deep in their own territory when senior halfback Jim Warren fumbled at the 11-yard line. From there, Michigan was able to drive home a short touchdown that put them up 14-8 with 5 minutes to play. Michigan held on, and the brotherly battle ended with a big upset victory for the Wolverines. The loss was the first of the year for number 2, Illinois. The next short article is titled A Big Easy in Mississippi. Oxford, Mississippi, November 12, 1963. Number 3, Ole Miss, with a record of 5-0-1, had an easy opponent in the University of Tampa, a program not known for high-level football. The Spartans were essentially here just for the $12,500 payday. Last week, Tampa lost to another small-time program, Troy State, by a score of 7-0. So not much was expected from Tampa here in Mississippi. Yet, in the first quarter, Tampa held their own, and the score was 0-0. In the second quarter, Ole Miss scored the first touchdown of the game, and then Tampa looked like they might even things up as they drove the ball to the Ole Miss 41 before stalling. The game was still just 7-0 deep into the second quarter, but with just 6 seconds left in the first half, Ole Miss finally got into the end zone for a second time, although they missed the extra point and led 13-0 at the break. Ole Miss managed one touchdown in the third quarter, but the floodgates opened in the fourth when Ole Miss scored 3 more touchdowns to win the game 41-0. Tampa was held to just 4 first downs for the entire game. And in total yards, the Ole Miss Rebels ran up 399 to just 81 for the Spartans. Ole Miss improved its record to 6-0-1, but didn't prove anything to the pollsters in doing so. The AP College Football Poll. Today, Tuesday, November 12, 1963, the AP poll came out and there was a tiny surprise as Navy moved up to number 2, including 4 first-place votes. The number 2 ranking is the highest in 18 years for Navy. The last time they were number 2 was in December 1945, when they entered the last game of the season against Army, ranked number 2. Navy lost that game 32-13 to an Army team that was the undefeated number 1 team. It was the second consecutive year that Army beat Navy for the national football title in the final game, with Army going undefeated in both the 1944 and 1945 seasons. Here's the AP results from November 12th, 1963. Number 1, Texas, 8-0-0, 48 first-place votes. Number 2, Navy, 7-1-0, 4 first-place votes. Number 3, Mississippi, 6-0-1. Number 4, Michigan State, 5-1-1 with 1 first-place vote. Number 5, Oklahoma, 6-1 and no ties. Number 6, Pittsburgh, 6-1-0. Number 7, Alabama, also 6-1-0. Number 8, Illinois, 5-1-1. Number 9, Auburn, 6-1-0. And number 10, Nebraska, 7-1-0. NFL games from November 10th, 1963. Browns versus Steelers in Pittsburgh. Last week, Jim Brown steamrolled over the Eagles for 223 yards in the Browns' victory. On Sunday, he looked like he was going to put on an equally impressive show for the largest crowd in Pittsburgh Steelers history, a capacity filling 54,497. Brown rushed for 92 yards on 15 carries in just the first half. 45 of those yards came on 5 carries as part of a 74-yard second quarter touchdown drive that gave the first place Browns a 7-0 halftime lead. The key play was a 4th and 1 at the Steelers' 30, in which Jim Brown smashed through for 5 yards to keep the drive alive. In the middle of the third quarter, with the score still 7-0 Browns, the Steelers pinned Cleveland on their own 2-yard line with a 62-yard punt. Then came the play of the game. Cleveland quarterback Frank Ryan pitched the ball to Jim Brown, who was to run wide left, but Brown was immediately confronted by Steeler defenders. Ben Garlikoff of the Dayton Daily News describes what Jim Brown did next. Thinking quickly, he stopped, and before he was hit, he threw the ball from 3 yards deep in the end zone to about the 8-yard line. No one had a chance to get it, but one Clevelander was in the general area. He was still on his feet when he let go, but immediately upon the release of the ball, Brown was tackled. The officials ruled it a safety, despite the fact that Brown was not touched before he released the ball, and the pass was not considered grounding as a Cleveland receiver was in the area where the ball was thrown. Still leading 7-2, Cleveland mounted a drive a short while later and got to the Pittsburgh 18 when halfback Ernie Green fumbled. Pittsburgh took advantage of the mistake and drove the ball for a go-ahead touchdown to make it 9-7. Cleveland could not get untracked on offense after that. Jim Brown had just 7 yards on 4 carries in the second half. That left Brown one shy of 100 yards for the game. It was only the third time in 9 games this season that Brown has been held below the century mark. Even worse was the performance of Browns quarterback Frank Ryan, who was just 11 for 25 passing. Under Ryan's leadership, 3 times the Browns had the ball in the fourth quarter and couldn't mount an attack. One newspaper questioned if Ryan will lose his starting job. The Steelers, on the other hand, did move the ball steadily when they had it, and their halfback John Henry Johnson piled up 131 yards. But their kicker, lefty Lou Michaels, missed on all 5 of his field goal attempts, including 2 in the fourth quarter. Michaels missed from 25 yards, 29 yards, 45, 45 again, and 49 yards. Despite the missed field goals, the Steelers held on to win it 9-7. The difference in the game was the controversial 2-point safety called against Jim Brown. Statistically, however, the Steelers mauled the Browns. Total yards favored Pittsburgh 382 to 227, and the Steelers had 23 first downs to just 14 for the Browns. The loss dropped Cleveland, which had won its first 6 games of the season, to a 7-2 record, while the Steelers improved to 5-3-1 and put themselves in playoff contention. Celebrating the victory, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette ran a huge banner headline on page 1 of the newspaper on Monday that read 54,497 see Steelers win 9-7. Eagles versus Giants at New York. The 6-2 Giants hosted the 2-5-1 Eagles on Sunday in front of a crowd of 62,936 at Yankee Stadium. The Giants came into the game riding a 3-game winning streak in which they've pounded their opponents by a score of 118 to 48. But in the first quarter, the Eagles made a game of it after Y.A. Tittle led the Giants on a 12-play, 85-yard TD drive. The Eagles came right back and tied it on a 64-yard bomb by King Hill. The game was tied at 7 at the end of the first quarter. Then in the second quarter, Giants quarterback Y.A. Tittle took over. He led the Giants on 3 touchdown drives, and by the half, he was 13 of 15 passing for 214 yards. At the beginning of the third quarter, Tittle masterminded another touchdown drive, this one going 90 yards in 11 plays, and the score ballooned to 35-7. Tittle was retired from the game in the middle of the third quarter, having connected on 16 of 20 passes for 261 yards and 3 touchdowns. Gene Ward of the New York Daily News wrote, "The bald eagle as Tittle is known, has never quarterbacked a better game in his entire career. The early exit for Tittle gave rookie quarterback Glenn Griffin substantial time on the field. He went 5 for 11 for 67 yards, including the first touchdown pass of his career. The final score was 42-14 Giants. William Wallace of the New York Times started his article on the game with this: "It is a pleasure to behold a winning football team going about its business, and the New York Giants once again delighted their many fans. The Giants really are something right now. What the Giants really are is tied for first place in the Eastern Division after their thrashing of the Eagles. Despite the 28-point margin, the game wasn't even as close as the score indicates. The Giants gained 417 yards with 25 first downs compared to just 101 yards and just 6 first downs for the Eagles." Other games of note: the Chicago Bears held the Los Angeles Rams to just 88 yards of offense and shut them out. They never let the Rams get deeper than the Bears' 36-yard line. But despite gaining 272 yards on offense and never turning over the ball, the Bears could only manage 2 field goals in a 6-0 victory. The Bears at 8-1 are now holding teams to an average of just 9 points per game. They remain tied for first with the Packers, who handily beat the Vikings in Green Bay 28-7. And here's the NFL standings after Week 9 in 1963. Eastern Division, first place tie, Cleveland and New York, both 7-2. Third place, St. Louis, 6-3. Fourth place, Pittsburgh, 5-3-1. Fifth place, Philadelphia, 2-6-1. And seventh place tie between Dallas and Washington, both 2-7. In the Western Division, there's a tie for first with Chicago and Green Bay both 8-1 and 4 games ahead of Detroit and Baltimore, who are tied for third at 4-5. Minnesota's in fifth at 3-6, and Los Angeles and San Francisco are tied for last, seventh place, at 2-7. AFL games from November 10th, 1963. Chargers versus Patriots in Boston. The AFL's leading teams from the Eastern and Western divisions clashed in Boston on Sunday in front of 28,402 fans. In the first quarter, San Diego quarterback Tobin Rote passed 27 yards to Lance Allworth for a touchdown and an early 7-0 lead for the Chargers. Rote is a 35-year-old veteran who spent 10 years with the Packers and Lions in the NFL and then 3 years with Toronto in the CFL before joining the Chargers this season. The 7-0 lead held up all afternoon, as the only other scores in the game were 2 third-quarter Patriot field goals. The Pats did manage to gain 291 yards on offense, but 3 fumbles and 2 interceptions stifled their offense in the 7-6 loss. Jets versus Oilers in Houston. The New York Jets got a 93-yard punt return touchdown early in the fourth quarter in Houston and took a 21-17 lead. And then 36-year-old quarterback George Blanda put Houston on his back, leading the Oilers to 2 fourth-quarter touchdowns and a 31-21 lead. The Jets scored late to make it a final score of 31-27 Oilers. Blanda did both the passing and the kicking for the Oilers, racking up 205 yards and a TD through the air and booting 4 extra points and a 41-yard field goal in the victory. The win propelled the Houston Oilers into first place in the Eastern Division and buried the Jets in last. AFL standings as of November 10, 1963. In the Eastern Division, Houston in first place at 6-4. Buffalo second, 5-4-1. Boston third, 5-5. The New York Jets fourth and last at 3-5-1. And in the Western Division, the San Diego Chargers in first at 7-2. Oakland second at 6-4. Denver and Kansas City tied for last at 2-6-1. Well, that's all. Thanks for listening. And if you're watching this through Substack, please leave a comment. I'd love to hear your feedback. Coming soon is an article on the games of November 16 and 17. Thanks again. Bye-bye now.